Prime Minister listens. I have to say, I'm really happy. I wasn't sure what to expect. I'm really happy that the ministers and the Prime Minister have been very, very open to MPs coming forward with their local issues and with their broader concerns about how housing is going to roll out, for example, and keeping an eye on how municipalities are faring under those policies. So that's if that's the trajectory we continue in, I'm confident that it's going to be a good deal for everybody.
Welcome to Municipal Affairs. It's a well-worn path, but not an easy one, making the leap from municipal government to federal politics. Many have tried, few have succeeded. But in the most recent federal election, we saw a notable shift, a wave of municipal leaders stepping onto the stage nationally. Among them, to name a few, former Yellowknife Mayor Rebecca Alty, former Vancouver Mayor Gregor Robertson, and Dominique O'Rourke, once a city councillor for the city of Guelph, Ontario. And perhaps the most surprising of all, Kristina Tesser Derksen, a former Milton Town Councillor who clinched her federal seat in a dramatic fashion. On election night, she trailed her opponent, but after a judicial recount, her victory was confirmed by a razor-thin margin of just 21 votes. Now, she is the Member of Parliament for the newly created riding of Milton East, Halton Hills South. Tesser Derksen first entered politics in 2018, representing Ward 1 on Milton Town Council, and was re-elected in 2022. Her journey from the council chambers of a growing Ontario town to the House of Commons under the leadership of Prime Minister Mark Carney is one of resilience, timing, and perhaps a bit of destiny. Now, we sat down with MP Kristina Tesser Derksen to talk about those early days of transition from local to federal politics, the lessons she's carried forward, and what she hopes to accomplish now that she's on Parliament Hill. Kristina, thank you so much for sitting down with me and talking about your journey from town hall, because you were a former town councillor, to Parliament Hill, where you are now the Member of Parliament for the riding of Milton East, Halton Hills, if I'm getting that right here. I want to start off a little bit of a backgrounder, if you don't mind. What inspired you to make the leap from municipal politics to federal politics?
Yeah, good question. I've been asked it a number of times, and it certainly wasn't something I kind of sought out, to be perfectly honest. So I was pretty happy doing my work in municipal politics. And as you know, it's nonpartisan, which actually was pretty appealing for me because I don't consider myself hyper partisan. I had actually been approached last June to potentially run in the provincial election for the Liberal Party in Milton. And at that point, I thought, oh, no, I don't think I'm ready to make that jump. But they did come back in January with the general provincial election that was being called and said, we really would like you to run. We want to put good people forward. And at that point, I'd had a few months to think about, what my trepidation was. And, it's one of those kind of just basic human things where we're just afraid of what we haven't done before and maybe what we don't know. And I thought, no, I have to step over this kind of trepidation and give it a shot. I really was happy with the platform that the party was putting out on the provincial level. And, I went into it pretty realistic, knowing, you get a sense of how things might go. And I was fully prepared for the reality of running in an election that was maybe an uphill battle. And my opponent at the time was a friend of mine who I had sat next to at town council for 4 years, Z Hamid. And, we had a chat and he said, no, we'll have a great campaign between the two of us. We both know, the integrity that we bring to our politics. So it was a great campaign. I was a newbie. I learned a lot, had a great group of volunteers that came out to help me out. Of course, we were campaigning in February, which was really lousy, like the worst month you could pick to be campaigning because we're trying to knock doors and get out to meet people in frigid temperatures and not much daylight. So really good learning experience. We were not successful, although we outperformed the party overall. We did pretty good, actually, better than I think a lot of people thought we would. And then I went back to life as normal. But at that point, I had a taste of, partisan politics. And 2 weeks later, I got a call asking if I would consider running in the federal election. And at that point, again, you kind of hem and haw a bit. It's like, oh gosh, I'm going to go back-to-back campaigns. I don't know if I'm the right person. And again, I checked myself and I said, wait a minute, this is a great opportunity. You have important work that you want to do. And, my interest generally is in more federal level work. And so I thought, what am I saying? Of course I'll do it. If you think I'm the right person to put forward, then I'm happy to take up that mantle. We're facing, as you know, a point in our history as a country that is pretty pivotal. And with economic threats coming up from south of the border and national unity issues, and there's just a lot of work to get done. And, I want to do my part. So I ultimately said yes, jumped into the campaign. Luckily, the volunteers who I had formed relationships from the provincial campaign followed me over, and a whole bunch of new people came out, and we had over 200 volunteers. And half of them had never volunteered on a political campaign before, I think, which really speaks to against the consequence of this election and the excitement that they had. And of course, it was a new riding as well. So there was a lot of new first steps that a lot of people who were involved were taking.
What was it about the Liberal Party that drew you to them, both provincially and federally? Because I come from Ontario, originally from Clarington, Ontario. When I worked at Queen's Park, I worked under Dalton McGuinty, Leon Dombrowski, Agriculture Minister. So my family has a long history going back to the Peterson era of the Liberal Party that drew me to the Liberal Party. For yourself, what was it about the Liberal Party in 2025 that you said, okay, Bonnie Crombie and Mark Carney are the two leaders that I could see leading Ontario and Canada from a municipal perspective, and then I want to be part of that team because they called me up.
Yeah, well, I sat down and chatted with Bonnie when I was considering the decision to run provincially and instantly liked her a lot. She's got lots of charisma, she's smart, she's got a, great resume. And the platform, really, I mean, the provincial responsibilities are healthcare and education, and that's what the platform was focusing on in a big, big way. Whereas, the conservative provincial platform was a little more, maybe a little more glitzy with the beer in the corner stores and stuff like that. But I thought, really our job is to take care of education and hospitals and healthcare. So that was something I could get behind. It would be difficult, I think, for me, and I'm sure for many other politicians, to get behind platforms that they're not genuinely invested in from a personal values perspective. So I was able to do that provincially. And then, Mark Carney, like, the man has such an incredible wealth of experience and in the private and public sectors. And what a sea change it was for the Liberal Party. And again, not being super partisan, when I learned more about him and learned more about what the party was proposing as far as dealing with the immediate threat of these economic tariffs from the US, I thought, if I was running a multi-billion-dollar company and I needed to hire, an economist to guide me through some turbulent economic times, let's look at some resumes. I mean, he was the clear choice for me, right, from that perspective. And I think he was a clear choice for much of the country. And yeah, it's been great so far. I got to meet him several times during the campaign, and that really helped me kind of solidify my decision because he's a very genuinely nice person. He's humble and he's warm and he's very welcoming and a real kind of consensus builder and likes collaboration. So getting behind him as a leader was very simple. And the platform of, the one Canadian economy, breaking down interprovincial trade barriers. We had kind of a groundswell of patriotism that was happening at that time because of this common threat that we were facing from the United States. So that was a pretty easy decision, actually, after I got over that initial, I guess it was fear or, self-doubt. From then on, it was pretty simple to get behind this leader and the party's platform.
Two-term councillor from Milton, Ontario, first elected in 2018, then re-elected in 2022. I've spoken to about 500 municipal leaders from across this great country, from coast to coast to coast. And the constant thing I often hear during those campaigns is everything's on the table: federal issues, provincial issues, municipal issues. You hear about them all, and you have to deal with them because you are the closest to the people. Now, you've ran both in a provincial campaign and a federal campaign in the last, I want to say, 6 months, because we're only in the 6th month of this year. How did those differ? That, and I want to specifically talk about that federal campaign. How did those differ from your first two municipal campaigns? Because I can imagine you probably heard the exact same issues that you heard in the municipal campaigns, but you're now a partisan, you're tied to a political party. Did you have to answer the questions differently, or did you try to be your authentic self as you were in the first two campaigns that got you elected to Milton Town Council?
Well, I always strive to be my authentic self because that usually keeps me out of trouble the most, believe it or not. because I think people can sense when you're giving them a line, right? So the more authentic you can be, I think the better, and that served me really well in those previous elections. Generally, unless people are really dialed into policy stuff, and most people are not, they don't really care what level of government is doing the job for them. They just want the job done. So oftentimes as a municipal councillor, I would get questions about, I need help with a passport. I've got an immigration question. And it's certainly an opportunity for education where I can say, that's not a municipal responsibility. I can't do much with my municipal position, but I can find you someone who can help. And that's when I would reach out to our provincial, whether it was our MPP or our excellent MP at the time, and who still is Adam Van Couverden, now in Milton West. So it was really important to do the relationship building between the different orders of government so that I had a direct line to get people the help they needed. But you're exactly correct when you say the partisanship made a difference, right? Because now I got a taste of it during the provincial campaign. And at that time, the previous prime minister had not yet resigned, right? So Justin Trudeau was still the prime minister. And there were, some conversations at the door about him in the provincial election. Because again, people just hear Liberal Party and they automatically think that there is this, direct line between the provincial and federal parties. And so, I found myself kind of trying to answer those questions from a place of not great knowledge, to be honest, because I was not a member of the federal Liberal Party. But I'd always try to bring the focus back to the provincial issues that were part of the platform that people were going to be voting on or not for the Liberals at that point. And then when you got into the federal place, I came in pretty late to the federal election race. I just had, the 5 weeks. I was acclaimed, I think, a day or two before the election, the writ actually was issued. So, I was a latecomer. So I had to really work at getting my name out there, knocking tons of doors. And at that point, yeah, the question was more about economic uncertainty because the news, the media was really focusing on all the Donald Trump stuff coming up from the South. And I really didn't focus too much on the party. It was really about the platform and the policies that our leader was putting forward. And I focused a lot on the experience and um, kind of brilliance of our leader. To be frank, I gave that analogy many times that I just gave you about if you're hiring people who are tell me about the resumes. And really at that point you're comparing conservatives and liberals federally. I mean, you have a career politician on one hand, and you have someone else who has worked in national economies and in the private sector. So it really became a discussion about who you wanted representing you as the leader, as the prime minister, and then when I could, who you wanted representing you locally, because I try to remind people all the time, when you have an issue, you're not picking up the phone and calling the prime minister, you're calling your local representative. So you want to make sure they're responsive, available, and understand the local issues.
I just want to follow up on that for a second because in my conversations that I've had, and you probably know this as well, and this is Chris Brown saying this is not the MP saying this. So if you want to send an email, please send it to me and not the MP. But I get a sense that there is a misunderstanding of the jurisdictional roles that each level of government plays. And when people go door knocking, no matter if you're a municipal, provincial, or federal candidate, you will hear all three levels of government's concerns addressed at the door. When you were door knocking federally, did you get questions about municipal responsibilities? Because A, you are their municipal counselor. So like, oh, it's perfect time that I can actually ask you what's going on with my garbage collection. Or did you get a sense during that campaign, that 5 weeks, that people were actually aware that you were running federally and they wanted to talk about what was going on with the international trade between America and Canada? Or were people tuned out and said, oh, another campaign, here we are again? What was your sense on the ground that people were engaged, or was there sort of a misunderstanding of what responsibility you were running for?
Yeah, I think there's generally always a little bit of confusion over which order of government handles which jurisdictional issues, and that's fine. And again, I try to use that as an opportunity to educate people and work with them. But certainly at the door, I mean, people are more interested in things that are impacting them directly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're hearing the news, they're hearing the economic stuff, Donald Trump, how are we going to deal with him? But then it's like, oh, my adult children can't afford to buy a house, or I'm concerned about development in my neighborhood. So that's where you do have some intersectionality with some issues, right? So there's some issues when we talk about home building. There's a lot in the federal liberal platform about building homes and about getting the government back into the business of building homes. You have the province involved, of course, because they tell municipalities how many residential units they need to build in a certain amount of time. And then the municipalities are the ones reviewing the development applications and dealing with development charges and changes to those. So there really are some issues where, and many, many issues where there's a lot of, two-way discussion between all those orders. But then there is like the legal, well, we're responsible for this and they're responsible
Yeah.
for that. So I got into some really good conversations at the doors. Generally people were interested in how the Liberal Party was going to fix, the affordability crisis and in our area about housing. Lots of people were interested in talking about the overarching economic approach to dealing with the tariff threat. But by and large, people want to know how they are going to be directly impacted. So, for example, when I was knocking doors up in Georgetown, I would get people saying, you're from Milton, Kristina, are you going to like build a bunch of condos in Georgetown? Like, and so I would say, well, that's actually, municipal decision making as to how they roll out the number of units they have to build, but the province tells them how many. Talk to your local council and mayor about the type of built form that you want for your community. And then, of course, the federal side, we're just talking about what types of facilities are going to be available to actually build the housing that we need. So, and that discussion can be a little overwhelming for some people, again, because they just want to know what kind of impact their community is going to experience when all this housing gets built, for an example.
Because you represent, and I say this with respect, but you represent a more urban rural divide riding now as well. From someone from, and I say town, and I still can't believe the town of Milton is still a town. It should be a city at this point, but the town of Milton, which is more urbanized, it's a big, vast, growing community. Did you hear the same concerns when you were in rural parts of your riding compared to the urban parts of the riding, or were they all focused on the affordability challenges that people were going through?
Yeah, like largely people are concerned about affordability. But luckily, the ward that I represented as a municipal councillor really was a little microcosm of the riding I now represent.
Wow.
So Ward 1 in Milton, very unique ward, by large, the largest geographical ward in the town. So we include, our ward includes parts of old Milton, what we call downtown, the charming downtown core of Milton, all those old century homes, town hall. And then we have a little bit of an industrial complex up near the 401. We've got new development in the south part of the ward, and then a huge, huge rural area, which also includes the hamlets of Campbellville, Moffat, and Brookville, and lots of farm, agricultural land, some greenbelt lands. So I already had experience in kind of building a bridge between what are sometimes those conflicting interests of urban and rural residents. And now I find I'm doing it on a much larger scale because not only am I representing kind of two types of neighborhoods, but I'm representing really two separate towns because Georgetown is obviously its own town, and I've got the east half of Milton, which could be its own town, right? So now I've got two kind of distinct identities in these two towns, lots of rural area in between. And Georgetown traditionally is pretty conservative leading, so that was it was a challenge and a kind of a goal of mine to build a lot of relationships in the Georgetown area. Now, once we started knocking on doors, we found a lot more liberals than I think we realized we would. And Milton East, I think, tends to, it's a bit of a swing, but it tends to lean a little bit left. So there were all those considerations we made as well when we were, kind of figuring out where to spend a lot of our time in door knocking because we did not have a lot of time. We had to prioritize. But yeah, I am finding folks in Georgetown are very concerned about preserving the kind of small town feel that they have there. It's the same discussion we went through in Milton 20, 15 years ago when all this new development was happening. So I have been through that. And I think that helped me a lot in those discussions with residents in Georgetown in particular. And I could say I was born and raised in Milton, small town, spent lots of time in Georgetown. I worked there for a number of years. And we went through all this in Milton with all the new development coming in. Like I get the concerns. I understand that you don't want the, character of your town to change. There's a way to do this where we kind of preserve that, what makes it a place that people want to move to while making sure that more people can move here.
You're so on election night, it is not officially declared that you are a winner or loser because it goes to it goes to it gets scrutinized, then it goes to an official recount where your victory came down to 21 votes. 21 votes, and our mutual friend Clark Somerville of Halton Hills would call you landslide Tesser Derksen because that's what he was going around FCM saying. You need to go talk to Tesser Derksen. He's a landslide Tesser Derksen. Um, you get elected, your result comes down to a recount. When you were going through that process of recount, how sort of humbling was it to just say, no matter what happens, even if I win or lose, it's in the hands of the voters? Did you have to pinch yourself when they called you up and said, the official recount is here? You're officially the next MP, the first MP for Milton East, Halton Hills.
Yeah, the whole thing has been quite a roller coaster. And the reason Clark calls me, landslide Kristina or landslide Tesser Derksen, is because actually out of all the four recounts across the country, we had the most votes. I mean, we were the fourth closest race in the country. So you may have heard out in Terra Nova, that was 12 votes. In Windsor, it was
Te-
4 votes. And Terrebonne was one. So I actually made out pretty good compared to some of my colleagues. But yeah, and what had happened, you're quite right, on election night, it was too close to call. So at about 1 in the morning, I said, "Sorry, guys, we'll have to regroup tomorrow." But at that time, we knew that Bruce Fanjoy had defeated Pierre Poilievre, which was great. I was able to kind of give a shout out to Bruce, and of course, Mark Carney, our Prime Minister, had been elected. So we were able to celebrate some victories with those colleagues. And then the next day, after the special ballot poll had been counted, that's when we found out that we had lost by 298 votes. And that stung. Honestly, it did, because 298 votes, that's like an extra day or two with a couple of volunteers knocking a few doors. Like it was a tough loss, but I felt really good about the campaign we had run. The volunteers were all motivated to keep going, and they were already talking about the next election, which is wonderful. We have a WhatsApp group that is still extremely active and really great. So they really kind of carried me through those couple days as I adjusted to life. Going back to, I had work to do. I was still a municipal councillor. I still had a law practice that I was running. So that was Tuesday. And then on the Friday afternoon, I got a call from the returning officer. And she said, "Oh, we've completed the validation." And I thought, "Oh, she's just letting me know the validation's done." And we found an error, is what she said. There had been a transcription or a tabulation error. And this is part of the checks and balances in this system, right? I mean, all the officers report their results by phone to the returning office, and then the returning officer has to review and make sure all the numbers were correctly transcribed. That's where she caught the error. And she said the error requires a correction, and that correction has you actually ahead by 29 votes. So I don't remember all that she said after that, but she said, "Do you want the numbers?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I should write down the numbers." And she said, "This triggers an automatic judicial recount." And I said, "Oh, I hope that's not too much more work for you." And she said, "Well, it has to happen either way." So that was a whole other process. So now we had one, and had to await the recount results. So that was 2 weeks it took for the recount, because they have to find a space, they have to get a judge assigned, because the whole procedure is overseen by a superior court judge. And the parties had to get their respective people lined up, their legal teams lined up. So for those who have not been through a judicial recount, all the ballots get, well, the judge really drives the process, but in this particular context, the judge said we're looking at everything. So there were 20 tables set up. Each party had scrutineers at each table. There were lawyers for both parties there. Elections Canada had 2 workers at each table, and they all went through the votes again. So the recount started on a Tuesday at noon, and 5 minutes to midnight on the Thursday, I got a call saying, "You did it, 21 votes."
Now you have to really put yourself in the other person's shoes because you're like, oh, that's just one extra apartment building I forgot to knock on or could have got out. Um, so you get elected and you have to resign your seat as town councillor and head off to Ottawa. Very quick turnaround because there was a very quick turnaround from when the election happened to when the speech from the throne was read last month. Um, when you walked into the House of Commons for the very first time, as MP elect, as the first MP for Milton East, Halton Hills, how humbled did you feel at that moment? Because you're one of a handful of Canadians in our Confederation since Confederation to have ever walked on that floor as a member of Parliament. How much responsibility did you put on yourself when you walked into that room and think to yourself, what have I gotten myself into? Or let's get down to work and let's do it.
Yeah, and you're right. The turnaround for me was particularly fast because I was 2 weeks behind all of my colleagues who had been elected. They had already come to Ottawa, they had gone through their onboarding, they had their laptops and phones, they had done all their training. So it was really we worked triple time to get caught up. And I'm at a pretty good place now. I'm working on getting staff and constituency offices set up. But the whole experience of putting your name forward in an election from start to finish, I think for any person should be a humbling experience because you've got people who are coming out, the volunteers, they're sacrificing their time, their physical energy, time away from their families, their reputations. Like all of this is being staked on some candidate who they haven't actually seen working in the position yet. So there's a lot of faith that people put into us, and that's very humbling right from the beginning. And I've said thank you, thank you, thank you so many times and in so many ways as I can think to say it. And really, I said to my volunteers at our second election night victory party after the recount results, I said thank you is really an absurdly shallow term, like to express the gratitude I have because without them, none of us get anywhere. But certainly the humility followed me to Ottawa. Absolutely. So, the first time I walked into the House of Commons and, it's a big, beautiful room that's been retrofitted in West Block because as Center Block is under construction for, another decade probably. Um, but yeah, it's a place you've seen on TV, you've seen in your civics books and in your history books and all of a sudden you're standing there and yeah, the gravity certainly does hit you. You have an enormous responsibility. People are expecting results and they're expecting them quick, and that's what our leader promised and that's what he's working on with all of us. And you can't take your time there for granted at all. And as you know, we're in a minority government and that it's not quite as stable as it would be in a majority. So, theoretically another election could be called, within a year. So we are going to be held to account by Canadians. The responsibility each of us individually have to our ridings, to each other as colleagues, to the country as a whole, to the party and the values and beliefs that the party holds. I mean, it just goes on and on. The amount of deference you have to give to the privilege. It's really a huge privilege to be in those chambers and speaking on behalf of people. So it's not lost on me. And I was in the elevator just last night with another MP, and we got talking about this actually about my first couple weeks, and he said, "I'm 6 years into this." And I still get this like overwhelming rush every time I go into the house. So I don't think it goes away.
What prepares you from your past municipal experience to be a great MP going into the future? Because there's a lot of weight on your shoulders right now, and you're one of 343 members of parliament who are deciding the future of this country. I know you're in a minority government, but everyone has a vote in that House of Commons. Um, what what in your past is preparing you to be the best MP that you can be for the people of Milton East, Halton Hills?
It's my work in advocacy and representation, and there's the job to do in representing a constituency, and then there's empathy and compassion you have as someone who has to be very involved and in tune with what's going on in your community and the lives of your constituents. So, previous work experience I have, originally I worked as a funeral director. So, when you're dealing with people at some of the darkest times of their lives and trying to navigate them through a process that is, really sensitive and delicate, you learn a lot about how to deal with people on their level, to come to them and provide what they need to get through a tough time. I went to law school. I worked as a lawyer, and that's definitely an advocacy and representation role. And again, when I started out, I was doing family law, and oftentimes lawyers will talk about family law divorce as being kind of like a death, right? So I was finding a lot of those kind of what people would call softer skills really translating over into my practice of law really, really nicely, and the empathy and compassion that I would bring to clients as well as the skills you need to advocate, for your clients. And again, those went into political representation really easily. They translate really well. I think there's a reason why there's so many lawyers in politics, right? Because that's our job, is to advocate, to represent in the best interests of the people who are counting on us. So at the municipal level is where I learned how to translate those skills into a more representative role, not just for an individual constituent, but now for an entire town, because our responsibility is also to the corporation of the town of Milton as a whole, just like it is as an MP to the entire country, right? We're representing a constituency, like I said, and we have obligations to our parties and our colleagues, but we are trying to run a country. And it's just the same skills keep following through, but they just keep growing in in expectation and in gravity. So I think I am in a privileged position to have that kind of background in education and experience, and people will keep me honest. As much as I try to keep myself honest, people will too. They'll keep me held to account. I have people in my own family who are, calling me saying, "What are you doing on this issue? How about this one? I heard what you said. Explain." And that's the job too. You have to be prepared to be in the hot seat a lot, which is why it's really important as well. Like when people are campaigning at any level of government, to be involved in those debates and those town hall meetings and getting out to the doors. In many ways, that's the fun part of the job because that's when you're interacting really closely with residents and constituents. But it can be uncomfortable, right? There's some hot button issues for sure that came up at debates, and sometimes the questions are uncomfortable. But I didn't get into this job because I want to be comfortable. It's the type of job where you have to be able to deal with a lot of criticism and scrutiny, and that's our job. So it's got to be done.
In the last election, the Liberal Party led the candidate search and elected MPs from who had previous municipal experience. In this last election, you are, in my just brief, quick calculations while you were talking, one of four newly elected MPs who came from the municipal sector: the Honorable Gregor Robertson, the Honorable Rebecca Alty, just down the road from you, Dominique O'Rourke from Guelph, and yourself. Mark Carney was at the last Federation of Canadian Municipalities convention in downtown Ottawa, where I was, and he pitched his vision for Canada to municipal leaders from coast to coast to coast. And he talked about building, building, and building. As a former municipal councillor who is now under the leadership of Mark Carney, representing the Liberal Party and Canada, how do you see this new prime minister in working with municipalities to ensure that their voices aren't forgotten? Because you were once one of them who would always say we need to make sure municipal issues are on the national stage. How do you see Mark Carney, Prime Minister Mark Carney, pardon my language, ensuring that municipal issues are heard? And do you think he is the right man to ensure the municipal issues are on the forefront?
Yeah, and I'm not that far removed from my municipal position, right? A couple weeks. And I'm finding I have to really like remind myself when I'm talking to colleagues and to the Prime Minister too, I have to shift gears here because it is a different basket of responsibilities. Um, I was at that conference as well. I made sure I was there to listen to the Prime Minister's remarks, and I also made it out to listen to Melissa Lantsman's remarks, so the Conservative MP, because I wanted to hear all the sides, right? I'm confident that our Prime Minister understands the value and importance of making sure municipalities feel secure in these new policies. At my level, I'm always thinking about the development charges piece, especially for municipalities in Ontario, right? Because there's very limited ways for how municipalities can raise revenue. It's property taxes and then the development charges. So when the province starts talking about slashing development charges and the federal government starts talking about it too, that's cause for some anxiety. And the Prime Minister reassured us at his remarks at FCM that municipalities would be made whole, and that the infrastructure funding that we need to bring neighborhoods forward so these units and residences can be built would be there. So there's plans in the works. There's lots of discussions going on. You mentioned four of my colleagues. There's quite a few more. I got a question yesterday in the House from a Conservative MP who was a regional councillor. I sit close to a former mayor of a municipality in Quebec, so there is a lot of municipal experience, kind of floating under the radar there, and there's a number of us that have discussions. A few other of my colleagues, Maggie Chi, I believe, from Toronto, and then
Jennifer
Jennifer. Gosh, I can't remember.
McKeevely
Yes, yeah,
from
McKelvey. Yeah,
McKelvey,
yeah.
former interim mayor of the city of Toronto, now representing the great community of Ajax.
Right. So, we sit next to each other a lot and chat about this stuff. And John Paul Danko from Hamilton as well, he's a counselor. So there's piles of us. And in our caucus discussions, which are confidential, but in other discussions, all these issues come up and we're able to kind of say, what our concerns are from our constituents, yes, but also from our previous experience as municipal or maybe provincial representatives that are there too. So, this prime minister listens. I have to say, I'm really happy. I wasn't sure what to expect. I'm really happy that the ministers and the prime minister have been very, very open to MPs coming forward with their local issues and with their broader concerns about how housing is going to roll out, for example, and keeping an eye on how municipalities are faring under those policies. So that's if that's the trajectory we continue in, I'm confident that it's going to be a good deal for everybody. I was on the plane yesterday, and I was sitting next to someone from the development community. We got talking about development charges, and of course, you get a different perspective from someone who's in the industry of building, and that's important. I mean, those perspectives are really important to take into consideration. So yeah, I'm confident that it's going to be a good plan rolling out. There's been a promise made, and the promise needs to be kept, as far as I'm concerned. And there's no point um, building homes if it's creating a severe negative impact on municipal councils and on the property tax base. Like there has to be a way to do these things, and there is a way to do these things so that the negative impact is minimal, but we get the maximum benefit out of having more homes built for people like, my four kids. I've got four young adult children who are trying to get out on their own. My daughter's getting married in a couple weeks, and the decisions around housing are an active discussion in our household. So I'm living that reality too.
Well, first off, congratulations on your daughter being married, getting married here in a few weeks. I have two last questions for you. One is a little bit of a negative one, but I need to ask it because I often hear the criticism when it comes to municipal politicians who get elected and go off to Ottawa is oh, they lose touch with the riding and they bring the voice of Ottawa back to their riding and not the riding back to Ottawa. How do you ensure that the voices of your constituents feel like they're being heard as you plan to enter into this new era of your career path as being an MP? Because I'm assuming you want to get reelected, whatever the next election is called. So how do you ensure that you don't lose touch with the people of your constituents?
Well, yeah, certainly if the voters want me again, I'd be happy to continue to serve. It's ultimately up to them. Um, it's about relationship building and maintenance, really. And I think, a very, very close and good relationship with the municipal councillors, the mayors of both municipalities, and economic development folks as well. So those are, even at FCM, I made a point of sitting down and chatting with staff and councillors and the mayors of both of Halton Hills, since she was here. So that's important, and it's about listening and bringing the concerns back. I'm a constituent. I live in the riding, obviously, and I have concerns about different things. Like I just told you one about housing.
Yeah.
So it's just remembering your place. Yeah, you're an MP, you're representing a large riding, but you live in the town as well. People are counting on you. You don't know everything. Like that's really important, I think, for anyone in elected office to remember, is no matter how smart you are, you don't know everything. And the only way you're going to get that knowledge is by talking to people and listening. So that's my plan to continue. It's served me well the past 6, 7 years that I've been in politics. Keep talking, keep having the discussions, the meetings, the relationships, be responsive, and don't isolate yourself. You have to be out there. When people start isolating themselves, politicians start isolating themselves, I think that's really like the death knell for reelection, for example. So, and that's the part of the job I like. I like people. I like talking to them. I like trying to solve their problems or doing what I can to help resolve their issues. So that's what I plan to continue doing.
So what does success at the end of the day look like to Kristina Tesser Derksen as the next first, not as the next, as the MP? Because I'm a person who always looks at what is the ROI? What am I going to ensure that I return on investment for the people of my community, the people who listen to the show, that they get back? What does success look like to you at the end of the day to ensure that you're doing the best job you can? Is it just listening, like you said, or is there something that you are passionate about that you want to get done while you're in Ottawa?
Yeah, I mean, there's people want results, right? They can
Yeah.
feel great about their representation, they can like me, but if they're not getting, results, return on their investment, the investment they put in their vote for someone, because that's a valuable asset, having a vote, having a franchise. If they don't feel like they're getting results that are improving their lives, then I don't think I would have done my job. And admittedly, there's only so much I can do. I'm one MP of, like you said, 343. And I'm not going to be able to solve everybody's problems and check every box off everyone's wish list, but making progress in the right direction in some capacity, hopefully, a large capacity, would be success for me. And just people feeling an improvement in their lives. And sometimes they can't put their finger on what's made their lives better over the past year or two, but in general, there's a feeling of optimism or a feeling of more satisfaction or of being more heard or being more involved that I think is hard to quantify, but people feel it, and I'm a big believer in um, politicians being successful because of the way they make people feel. I think Barack Obama said it, people remember how you made them feel. They might not remember what you said or did, but if they feel like they're valued and their opinions matter and you heard them and you worked for them and did your best, I think that's success for me.
Well, you have a very busy agenda for yourself for the next year, and I want to thank you so much. I know I said a half hour. We went way over the half hour mark, so thank you so much for indulging me and a few extra questions. Kristina, always a pleasure. And from all Canadians, we wish this Prime Minister and yourself all the best of luck, ensuring that what goes on in Canada is the best for everyone from coast to coast to coast. So thank you so much for sitting down with me and talking about your transition from municipal to federal. It's always a pleasure.
Great pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Municipal Affairs. Now, we hope you've enjoyed today's conversation and gained some valuable insights into the world of municipal and potentially federal politics. Now, if you enjoy the show as much as I have enjoyed creating the show, be sure to subscribe to it on your favorite podcast platforms or by visiting us on our YouTube channel. Now, your support means the world to us, so share this episode with your friends, your family, and even your communities. And also, if you want to learn more about the communities and the people that we feature on this show, visit us online on our website at crossborderinterviews.ca. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and we'll be back with a brand new episode of Municipal Affairs shortly. Till then, everyone.